Baruchim Abayim B'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Irgin Shir Torah, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov of Sumis, Shlita on changing one's tzedakah pledge. To have the great schus sponsoring shir, call Irgin Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Harold Smith.
Someone asked me recently, he pledged a sizable amount of money to help build a mikveh. And then he had a change of mind. He wanted to use the money to build a base medrash. It was a growing community. He wanted to reinvest the money in a different part of that shul. Is he allowed to change his mind? Change from a pledge to a mikveh to a base medrash. We once had a shadow where someone pledged a big amount of money to an ani, and then he realized that he had a relative that needed the money as well. So he wanted to change from ani la ani. He was going to give the same amount, but give it to a different ani. But then again, he pledged to the first ani. We'll soon talk about a shadow. Someone wrote out a check and wants to change his mind. Or someone put cash into an envelope to send back and wants to change his mind. But as we'll see, our derech always is, we try to find one yesod. We need to clarify one l'chayr simple point. When I pledge to give $100 to an ani, right? What is my chiyuv? What is my pledge? Don't forget, a pledge is a very chamadik concept. A neder, even not a neder, but a commitment, a yid's vart is a vart. What is my chiyuv actually? So Avadi will say, what do you mean? I pledged $100 to give to an ani. Is that true? There are two parts of my pledge. I have to give $100 and I have a chiyuv to give to that ani. Or maybe you'll say, there's no mitzvah to give to this ani more than this ani. The mitzvah is to give to an ani. So I made a pledge to give $100 to an ani. If I decided to give it to someone else, I'm doing the same mitzvah. Who said the ani was kind of some type of right because I said his name? Or maybe your commitment was give $100 to an ani. The same is true if I pledge to give to a mitzvah. I want to build a mikveh. So wonderful. But once I'm giving the same amount of money to build a base medrash, maybe I'm keeping my commitment. Or wait a minute, you said mikveh, not base medrash. You want to give base medrash, so give both. So that's the shayla. That sounds deceivingly simple. Now, really, what really complicates this question, as I said, Chazal, Klal Yisrael tzittis from even the word neder. Pasuk is toiva shalei tida, mitida v'loi tishalem. The Mechaber Yordei Reish Beis says a person should not be neder, he should not be ruggled to make nedarim, and if he is, he's called a chayta. And Siv Dal, the Mechaber says even regarding tzedakah, a person should not make a lashon of a neder. That's why we say bli neder. So there's no doubt about it. This sugya is frightening because it involves a neder. Now, I'm going to use the word neder, even though I'm not sure when you pledge money for tzedakah, does it become a neder? You have to have a lashon neder. We'll use the colloquial term as if it's a neder. Neder means commitment. But also makes the sugya intimidating. If I pledge to give to an ani, maybe it becomes his money. Maybe like we said, and then you talk about yenem zapruta, and we always speak about the chaymer of yenem of someone else's money. So we have really two groups of questions, changing from mitzvahs, from mikveh to base medrash, we'll soon see other examples, or changing from ani to ani. So listen please, I will tell you now, this is the only source in Shas to get any type of lead in our question. I read the Lashon HaGemara, it's only about a line and a half, and you tell me what you think. Erech and Davav, towards the bottom, Sela Zu L'Tzedakah, someone pledged money for tzedakah, and again, it's not a neder. This is what, you didn't use Lashon neder, but I'm going to say the word neder because that's really what we're talking about. He made a pledge. Actually, Bos Liyad Gabai, until the Gabai actually was kind of the money, Mutal L'Shnaisa. He's allowed to change it. Misha Bos Liyad Gabai, once the Gabai was kind for the intended purpose, Asa L'Shnaisa. Okay. So we'll soon talk about the Bo Liyad Gabai part of it. But let me ask you, what is the title of the word Mutal L'Shnaisa? Is that what we're looking for? Did we find the answer? You're allowed to change. You're allowed to give it, instead of giving it to the mikveh fund, you'll give it to the building fund. Not so fast. Because Rashi on this Gemara said, early actually, but on the same blot, L'tzrachav, you're allowed to change it for your own purposes. Ula'achaz man yashlim. Yishalei, I'm sorry. after he will pay back the amount. Now Rashi earlier explains when a person gives tzedakah al manaskein, it's unspoken tanai, hiktzel tzedakah shem yitztarech yitlena v'yishalem acheres. Rashi is learning l'shnoisa does not mean to change its address, where it's heading. Changing means, like we say in English, I need change. I want to change that quarter. I'm collecting coins, and this coin is worth the same like I have a quarter, but I like this particular coin. It's new, it's shiny. The Shnoise Rashi holds either you want to borrow the money and you'll pay back. Mois like tzah nitna. You'll put back different money, but of course you make sure to put back the money. Don't forget, that's the worst thing to do, to take money from tzedakah and not repay it. But Rashi's learning the Shnoise is the physical money. Either you're taking change, or you like that particular quarter, or you're actually taking the money, using it because you need small change, and you'll pay back right away. Moridik, but we have no right to our shaila. You're allowed to change the money, but not change direction of the money. Now, the only question is, if it's only just that, changing it, so why can you change it then? The Gabbai took it, so therefore what? I'm just taking a quarter, I'm putting a different quarter. I'm taking 4 quarters, I'm putting in a dollar bill. Teres says, Pashid, if I need change of a dollar, can I tell you, you look up. And you look up, I put my hand in your pocket and take out 4 quarters and put a dollar in. If I do not, that's called Geneva. Right? So once it's Boli Ad Gabbai, it's tzedakah money. Period. Even no loss. So according to Rashi, we have no even remez to our sugya. However, Toisvis, and this is the Vavam Beis, it's printed there, but really belongs to our sugya, quotes Rabbeinu Baruch, Mutal Shnoisa Mamish LeMitzvah Acheres. Now I have to be very careful. Rabbeinu Baruch is not talking about changing mi oni la'oni. He's talking about changing mi mitzvah la'mitzvah. You pledge to a mikveh, you're allowed to change it for a beis medrash. Zok Rabbeinu Baruch, in other Adam sell the mitzvah laniyam yachol lasayis men mitzvah acheres. Even take from tzedakah money that was earmarked tzedakah money and give it to build the beis medrash. Lishnoisa means changing the mitzvah, the direction of the mitzvah. You'll ask me, why did he say this? Very pashut. Because then it's easy to understand Bali Yad Gabbai. Once the Gabbai is kainit for this ani or this mossad, you can't play games, it's too late. What's Pshat Rabbeinu Baruch? So maybe the Hezbollah, like we said, that the pledge was to give money for a mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah or an ani. Who said this ani more than that ani? Who said this mitzvah versus that mitzvah? Now, however, there is, of course, a big chiddush in this pshat. Rabbi, what are you doing? You promised to give to a mikveh and then you're giving a beis medrash? So you didn't fulfill your pledge. Isn't that part of the pledge? And Takatais quotes Rabbeinu Maisha, and he says, Lishta l'shnoisa le'mashmekain. Now this is probably a technicality, but the l'shnoisa, the simple reading, the little dicta is going on the money, not on the pledge. So Rashi, so Rabbeinu Maisha and Rashi hold it's changing the money. Rabbeinu Baruch hold it's changing the actual pledge from mitzvah to mitzvah. And therefore he rejects the Rabbeinu Baruch. He brings another ayah from the Gemara, and he says basically you're not allowed to change the direction of the mitzvah. You pledge for a mikveh, keep it for a mikveh. So our chakira that we began with is a machlokes rishonim balei tosfos. Rabbeinu Baruch hold it's a pledge to give the chunk of money, but you could change. Rabbeinu Moshe and Rashi hold there's a pledge chal on the particular ani or the particular mossad. Now, again, the simple hezbah in Rabbeinu Baruch's big chiddush, that's what it means. Neder is chal on amount of money. We could also explain Rabbeinu Baruch like Rashi, even though they have a different maskana. Rabbeinu Baruch hold it's an unspoken tanai, it's an umdana that I'm an indecisive person. I'm pledging to give to this mitzvah. I might change my mind. Rashi learns you're allowed to take change because al das kain. Rabbeinu Baruch saying you're allowed to change direction al das kain. Maybe a little more to it, and that Chassam Sofer writes in 2 tshuvas in Yeridei If, as we'll soon see, even if you're allowed to change from tzedakah to tzedakah, don't forget the old klal of malam b'kodesh v'loy meridin. You have to change to a bigger mitzvah. Now it's hard to quantify mitzvahs, but you have to change. If you want to change, you can change from a smaller mitzvah to a bigger mitzvah. This is so once it's a bigger mitzvah, yesh b'cham b'sayim mana. I'm doing the same mitzvah plus. So that's the Chassam Sofer's understanding in the Pshat. But I want to add a little hezbollah because we have to apply this lamaisa. Let's assume I made a lashon neder. I neder to give to a mikveh fund. So I saw the Sefer Tzedakah Mishpat Amud Reish Yud Ches, Yankel Lebloi, Zechron Lebracha. He says if you use a lashon neder, then everybody agrees you can't change. Why? I always love this. Teretz Bohemet. Neder has a specific connotation. If you made a neder to Pliny, it's Pliny. You made a neder to mikveh, it's mikveh. So what's Rabbeinu Baruch talking about? When it was a pledge. A pledge doesn't have the details of which particular tzedakah. Great. So our group of questions for today is a machlokes balei ha'tosfos. How do we paskin? Yerdei Reish Nun Tes Sif Aleph only quotes Rashi. Sells tzedakah until the Gabi gets it. You're allowed to take it. You're allowed to borrow the money, of course, or you're allowed to take change, but make sure you pay back. Now it's Kamat Mefurish. That's the Chuvas. Give us Pinchas points out the Mechabad that makes no mention of the extraordinary heter Rabbeinu Baruch. He doesn't agree to it. Changing quarters for dollars is fine. Changing direction is no good. And he also points out from Ramon Reish Nun Beis Sif Aleph that speaks about changing even for Pidyon Shvuyim when it's mutter is mashma on a regular basis. We don't change. The Chachmas Adam Mekuf Memches Yud Aleph, the Marsham and Aleph Memtes quotes the Marshdam, difference of a dalat, but it's a few hundred years earlier, that also say emphatically we paskin not like Rabbeinu Baruch. I must mention the Ketzos HaChoshel Reishud and the Machna Ephraim and Tzedakah Siman Zayin do quote La Locha the Rabbeinu Baruch. So we can't be machriya when you have machlokes balei ha'tosfos and some paskin Rabbeinu Baruch, but I will say to take the following approach. Let's say I know I pledged money. I'm simply not sure how much I pledged. Was it 100? Was it a good day? 200? I'm not sure. But I definitely pledged money. What do I do now? So the Mechabas in Reish Nun Ches Sif Gimel Rabbi, Baruch Hashem, you're in trouble. Because you can't just give 100 and hope for the best. That's the basic klal of Sveika D'Oraisa L'Chumra. So Zok the Mechaba, give until you're convinced you gave enough. So if you're a real generous person, Baruch Hashem, you're in trouble, you have to give a lot of tzedakah. What's the point? Tzedakah is Sveika D'Oraisa L'Chumra. In Reish Nun Tes Hey, the Mechaba has a question. You have money in your pocket. This happens all the time after Purim. People wake up the next morning. This money, is it tzedakah money? Is it my money? Is it Shleich Mana's money? So the Mechaba says, if you have a suffix, if it's tzedakah or not, to give it for tzedakah. Sveika D'Oraisa L'Chumra. The Marsham, in the Tshuva and Aleph Mem Tes, he says, L'chayr, the same approach, Sveika D'Oraisa L'Chumra, applies to our group of questions. Because let's say you pledge for mikveh. You want to change it to a beis medrash. In the best scenario, it's machlokes rishonim if you're allowed to change. According to Rabbeinu Baruch, you're okay. According to Rabbeinu Moshe and Rashi, it's a chamor. According to Rashi, if you give to the beis medrash, you got a mitzvah, but you have to give to the mikveh. Doesn't help. So it's a suffix d'oraisa. And he quotes a strong lashon from the Marshdam, B'chol shini tzedakah is an issa d'oraisa usveik d'oraisa lahachmer. And I think that's what the Paiskim assume, that basically when you have a suffix, if you're allowed to change the direction of the tzedakah, take the safe approach, sveika d'oraisa l'chum. But what's lamaisa, if a person finds it difficult, let's say this person that called me, he pledged a sizable amount of money for the mikveh, and he wanted to give to beis medrash, and he couldn't do both. So here we have, based on a Rosh and the Chuvas Yud Beis, the Mechaber Reish Nun Ches Zayin says, If a person made a neder, taka, even a real neder, and for some reason he can't fulfill his neder, there's always the safety hatch that's called matan neder. As the Rush says, ma'aduch, when you make a regular neder, you're allowed to be matan neder with, of course, when you have the right excuse. So tzedakah is not different. And that's obvious that you have to have a good reason. You have to have a Pesach. But basically, in our case, it's probably even more mutter to rely on a mataras nedarim. Because don't forget, he's not changing, he's not taking from neder to ois neder, not giving a penny. He wants to redirect the money from the mikveh to the Beis Medrash. So that will be pashit that you're allowed to be matan neder. Now I must make a point with the Mechaber, when the Mechaber says that klal and Reish Nun Ches Zayin, that you're allowed to be matan neder, the B'kivega sends us to a Chuvas Radvaz in Chelik Dalid, Reish Lamed Dalid. Where the Radvaz says that a Enochanami, you as a Baal Tzedakah, you're allowed to be matan neder. But the Chacham that's matan neder should be put in Chayrim. Why? So you look at the Tshuva, it's very pashit. Because the person pledged money for tzedakah. He decides to change his mind. You go to the Rav, mutalach, have a nice day. So take all the money and buy pizza. So you mafsid aniyim. You channeled money, tzedakah money, to hedging money. But what's very pashit, that if you redirect, if you're not matanet, he should go and use the money for divrei chulin. He's using it for a different mossad or a different ani, as we'll soon see. The money is staying hegdish. It's just direction. So I talk to the Marsham, and that Shuv in Chelik Aleph says that the Radvaz would have no objection. I wouldn't say it's Chayr. So we have one Eitzah to any of our shilas today. If Lamais you have a valid Pesach, and you have to have a Rav that knows, Halchas Taras Adarim, you give him matan neder. Now, Lamaisa, that was mitzvah lemitzvah. Now let's focus on ani la'ani, then we'll apply it more specifically. So in a certain sense, we could believe ani la'ani is a little more chamor, because it's not just mossad, an abstract mossad, it's people. If you promised Ruvain and you give to Shimon, maybe it's gezel from Ruvain. So maybe it's worse than tzedakah l'tzedakah. Rabbeinu Baruch, that was mekel, was only mekel mitzvah lemitzvah. Maybe ani la'ani is worse. But then again, in a certain sense, and I saw some poskim say this, that ani la'ani in a certain sense is better than mitzvah lemitzvah. Because mitzvah lemitzvah means you're making a dramatic change. Mikveh fund, building fund. There's no shaykhs. But ani la'ani, it's the end of the day the same mitzvah of tzedakah. It's just either Ruvain or Shimon. And Lamaisa, the Machne Ephraim, that I mentioned, quotes the Marash Yafa, as the K'tzais, that Yotaka allowed to change even may ani la'ani. The Divrei Yecheskel and Simon Nun Hey explains that there's no chalois pledge on this ani. It's money to an ani. You give it to him or him. The Hari Besamim Taka says it's even easier than Shini Mitzedakah l'tzedakah. And I think the Hezbollah is because you're keeping the same commitment. You're giving to an ani. But most Poiskim, Asher Pim Al Chaim, say Punk Fakert. It's worse because you're changing from human being to human being. That's a big avla. The Radvaz, and that two that I mentioned, very strong lashon, that Lamaisa, he says, Amirase legvoya kemesirasi lehedjit. You pledge to ani like you gave an ani, and taking out of his not giving this different ani is he says Goy chol goyni oilam rishayim v'achrayim hold it's awesome. The Beis Yosef in the beginning of Reish Nun Tes quotes a kolbay, and I saw a chiddush that might surprise you, but you think about it, makes sense. According to the Machmirim, even if the first ani is moichel, it doesn't work. He could be moichel his money, but you pledged to give Ruvain, and now you're giving Shimon, you didn't keep your pledge. Now, if he says Ki'ilu is Kabalti, or he takes the money and gives it back to you, fine. But you pledged to give Ruvain, Mechila won't help. That's how much the commitment to give Ruvain is binding. The Chayshen got a particular steer, but in Peizayin, the Chafalef, the Machne Ephraim, Maskana, Kiva Eger, Reish Nun Ches Yud Beis, Gilyam Ashah, and the Chsam Soifa, and Simon Reish Lamadzan Yeredeya. Das Roiva Poiskim, Ein Mishanin Mi Ani La'ani, and the Chashulchan and Tzif Tezvav says the same thing. So the point is, it definitely seems that there's more of a chaymer regarding giving, changing me ani la'ani. But again, Mataras L'Dorim, L'Chor in this case would work. And I told you, I made a mistake, the wrong Marmakam, but Marsham is Chayla Gimel Kuf Yuates that says, in such a case where you're giving it tzedakah to a different ani, there's no chayim on the Rav. Okay, now let's apply this Lamaisa. Let's see how much we could use this Lamaisa. The original question, someone pledged to give to an ani, and now he has a relative that needs money. So the emphasis in Hilchas Tzedakah, Karav Koidim. But then again, you pledged to Pliny A. Why could you give to Pliny B? So the emphasis of Adar should not be done. You want to give to someone else, give someone else. I did see in a Sefer, Bayreach Tzedakah, it's Amid Reish from Aleph, he says an interesting chiddush, that if b'shas you pledge to give to a stranger, your relative was a needy ani who needed the money and you forgot about him, could be that would be a neder b'toyis. In Reish, the Ramon Reish L'Nches Siv Beis says that if you make a neder b'toyis, about it's not chal. So too, a neder tzedakah b'toyis is not chal. But he quotes on this in Karel, Tzedakah points out, it has to be just like I said. B'shas the neder to give to Ruvain, you forgot about Shimon, your ani, your relative. But if b'shas you made the neder to give Ruvain, Shimon was fine. After the neder, he became needy. It's not a neder b'toyis. So there is a concept of neder b'toyis. We'll soon see other examples. Now, one thing I wondered is, let's say you have a heta to change. Whether you rely on Rabbeinu Baruch, you rely on the Makilim. So there's no Issa Neder. Is there a problem of Mechusa Amona? As we know, a Yid has to keep Vart. Even Doiva Emes Bilvava, you thought about a price in your heart, you have to keep it. But once you make a pledge, Mechusa Amona. And then we have a concept, Mishapara, very Chama. A Yid's Vart is a Vart. So how do you override that? So the Yitzchak Petersburg and the Tshuva Simon and Aleph, he says that even if you're mutter to change, there's still a mechusa amona. Now we could wonder, first of all, if you didn't tell the oni directly you're giving him, it was just a pledge that you did by yourself, is there mechusa amona, there was no dibur? Also, it's very possible that if you hold the Hezmer Beinu Baruch is al das kain, you made the pledge, so it's like an unspoken Tanai. If you say, I might give you, I'm not sure, and then you decide to give someone else, is there a mechusa amona? You made it b'tanai. More so, if you are actually mata neder, or more so neder b'toyis is not an neder in the first place. So I'm not sure about that factor. Again, I get us to keep vart, but it could be. Definitely, I think, Mustavra, if it's a neder b'tois, the neder was never chalam afreya, there's no concern of mechusa amona. Someone asked me, true story, he put money in a Pushka with the wrong Pushka. He wanted to give to Pushka A, put in Pushka B's. So we'll soon discuss the status of a Pushka, but assuming the Pushka is kainit for the one that owns the Pushka, can you take back the money? And you're not putting anything in its place. That's a neder b'tois. Or he wanted to take out a $10 bill, he put in a $100 bill. So on the $90, it's neder b'tois. A common question, a person saw an ani, or the ani approached him, and he decided to give him a nice amount. He says, give me a minute, turns around, looks to, somebody turns back to give to the ani's gone. The problem of the disappearing ani, the collector in shul, they're very quick, they got to move on. So the question is, if you could find him, look, try to chase him a little bit, how do you try to do that? But let's say he's gone, and you don't even know how he looks really, so chasing won't help, He got mixed into the crowd. So here we come to an interesting thing. The whole question, the chayra, doesn't really start. I didn't make a pledge. I thought of giving this ani. Where's the neder? I'll say, believe. Zok the Machaba in Reishut, in Chaysh Mishpat, Reishut Beis Ches, he quotes 2 days, but he's noted to the Makilim, that neder has to be beficha. You have to verbalize it. Just thinking about giving is not a commitment l'gabi tzedakah. So according to the Machaba, and again I didn't speak to enough Sfarish Poiskim, but from Machaba's mashma, l'chayra, that there's no such thing as a neder b'machshava. So, and there are some poskim that go with that mechaba. So again, I'm not saying svardim, I mean only some svardim would be makel, a commitment in your mind. However, by us, in Reish Nun Ches Yud Gimel in Yeridea, the Rama also brings 2 days, va'ika kisvar rishayna. And he sends you to Chayshim Mishpat where you see that those 2 shittas. So definitely for Bnei Ashkenaz, we have a concept that machshava is mechayiv tzedakah. The Aruch HaShulchan in the end of Reish Nun Ches, this is very important just for those that have nervin. He says, even the Ramah that's machmir, it has to be a firm commitment. Some people think they might have pledged. That doesn't have to worry. It means a firm decision to give. Our case, minimally, is a firm decision. So here we come to an interesting psak attributed to the Chazon Ish, and Chaim Kanievsky, in the Derech Sicha, and also in Derech Hamuna, Perek Ches, Sifkan Peches, briefly says this in very important yesod. In the Derech Sicha of Reb Chaim is a story. Reb Chaim was getting on a bus, and a ani asked for money, so he decided to give the ani. But just then the door closed, and some people say, "Oh, saved by the bell," right? Chaim was distraught; he couldn't give the ani. The bus drove off. So he went to the fet of the Chazon Ish, and he asked the Chazon Ish, "What should I do?" The Chazon Ish said, "Give it to a different ani." So I understood from the Chazon Ish's words, and this is a beautiful lumdis, that when is there a din of machshava like the Ramah, which is not even chaladeis, but like the Ramah, that machshava is mechayiv, that's machshava to give. To which ani to give, there's no din of machshava. I mean, the whole machshava is a machlaikis, but if you thought of giving, you have to give. But lav dafka that ani. So here is a case, mi ani la ani, all agree allowed to change. So that's mamash our shaila. If you wanted to give money to this mashulach, very nice, but he disappeared. So if you pledge verbally, I'm going to give you $100, wait a minute, so then you have a problem. That's ani la ani. But if he just, like typically you decided to give, then you could change me ani la ani. Now this, I would say, is a mitzvah lefarsim, because it could relieve a lot of tension and sometimes problems. We have a lot of problems when either the mashulach disappears. Sometimes you give a check to a mashulach, and a year later you never cashed it. You have no idea where he is. You send money in tzedakah, they don't cash it. Sometimes it's the mossad closed. All these things that you're left with tzedakah money, you don't know how to do what's right. And briefly, Reb Chaim and Derech Hamuna, Perek Ches, Siv Ches, regarding a different context, but the same svara works. A person should make a statement once. You could do it after the share today for the rest of your life. It has a lifetime guarantee, guarantee, that whenever I pledge tzedakah in any situation, pledge, give, write out a check, anything, it's only chal when the ani gets it. Then, if he drops it, at least not my problem. But I can have sending in the mail, pledging, it's only chal tzedakah when the ani gets it in his hand. And then you are safe from all these problems. I wonder about one thing, rather, because a person has a Pushka in the house, and still the Sheikh Chayil before Lichtzin and faithfully keep putting money in the Pushka. So the same thing works, because let's say by the time you want to send the money in, the mossad is closed. So make it tonight. It's only chal when the Bala Pushka gets the money. But the problem is that there's a wonderful therapy, a ruchnius therapy, in giving tzedakah. As the Rambam says, Hakol lefi roiv hamayis, the Rambam offers on that Mishnah, that whenever you give money, it makes you a better person. You break the selfishness and you become a giver. The Rambam says if you have $1,000 to give for tzedakah, don't give, 500 to each ani. Break it up in small amounts, because every time you give, it has an impact on your neshama. Now, if you're telling me putting your money in the pushka and giving, it's not chal until you actually give it, does that reduce it all to one ma'aseh tzedakah? I hope not. Then we're losing a very beneficial therapy for our neshama. So I'm hoping that maybe what I'm saying is correct, that Lamaisa, the therapy of Lamaisa is giving. Lamaisa, you're taking money and putting it in the Pushka. And it will get to tzedakah one day. So maybe it's not the Kiyah mitzvah, hopefully it's the Maisa mitzvah. Okay. Question. They collected money for a achnasas kala, and unfortunately, when the money was raised, the shidduch was broken. There's no achnasas kala. So Rav Ozna, again, Sefer Ba'irach Tzedakah, in Reish Mem Vav, said Rav Ozna said a very logical thing. He said, okay, this shidduch was broken, but we hope to get a different shidduch. Okay, she needs an incentive now. She has a disadvantage. So keep the money until she makes a shidduch. As opposed to, obviously, Nebuch, if the kala died, you have to give back the money because there's no eventual use for the money. But the point is, it's logical. They gave it not for the chasana that's going to be next week, for a chasana. Collected money for a family that needs money, and the Rosh Mishpacha was nifta. He will not benefit from the money. But again, it's logical that a person gave money for the family also. Avada, the Rosh Mishpacha was why they gave, because they knew him. But the family now needs more money because they lost their breadwinner. So it makes sense, the Nadvanim gave it al das, it should go for the family that still needs the money probably more than ever. A little bit tricky question, they collected for a Talmid Chacham Oni, whose son was sick and needed treatment, and they had no insurance. So a few Gevirim got together, and they put together the money to pay for the medical expenses. Right before they actually went for the treatment, the kollel got on kupat cholim, got on insurance. So they didn't need the money. So you have a lot of money, and there's no need. So again, I say Barech Tzedakah and Amid Reish Mem Zayin, they asked Absham what to do. So he advised them, if you talk about just a few Gevirim, ask one of them, make an interview. Would you have only wanted it just for the operation? Or Lamaisa, the Talmid Chacham only needs the money without the operation. This just, exasperated his problem. If one ani says, if one Gevir says, I meant for the Talmid Chacham regardless, you don't have to go further. You could assume it was given to help the Talmid Chacham. So you have to have a little bit seichel and of course, honesty to figure out what to do. A tricky question, which is already a din in Shulchan Aruch, they collected money for a certain purpose, and they did a good job, and now they have leftover money. Now, typically, that's not the case. Unfortunately, there's always, a shortage, but there's leftover money for this purpose. So the Mechaber in Reish Nun Gimel Si Vav is clear. You collected money for someone and there's leftover, the money goes to the Ani. The question is why? He doesn't need it. So the Badi HaShulchan and Sivkat Mem explains that people give al das, they know sometimes it's extra money. So there's an umdana. And I guess that's why it's on another b'tayis, because there's an umdana. They need the money, a few extra dollars, they'll need it down the line. Now, Lamaisa, some also say once the Gabbai got it, he was kind of for the Ani. So even though when they started using it, there's leftover money, but the Ani was kind of. There's an interesting svar, the Masham and Gimel Nun Bey says it, but it's really an Arzarua and a Tzedakah, that really when you collected the money, it all became like one chunk of money. And Lamaisi needed this money. So the actual tzedakah became all the money, even though you'd end up using it, but use a little bit of each dollar. So he says, basically, you did use the money. Not all of it, you used the money. But Lamaisa, at the end of the day, avad, you can't collect al das to make extra money. That's geneva. But if you collect honestly and happen to be extra money, the halach in Shulchan Aruch is clear, you're allowed to keep, the only allowed to keep the money. Question about changing mitzvahs. If I pledge for a mikveh, can I redirect it to a beis medrash or vice versa, etc.? So this we saw is a machlokes Balei HaTosfos. Rabbeinu Baruch, Rabbeinu Moshe with Rashi. Again, how do we paskin? So Lamaisa in Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber does not mention Rabbeinu Baruch. As we said, the Rama also does not seem to hold you allowed to change direction of tzedakah. And as we explained, this is a suffix deraisa, and you have to be machmir ein mishanen mitzedakah letzedakah. The question is, our pledge, this person had a sizable amount and he wanted to change it. He wanted to change it for the beis medrash. So the truth is, I must mention, even if you hold, you want to be Saimach Rabbeinu Baruch, don't forget some place come a mekel. But there's another fact that has to be ma'alim b'kodesh. You want to change to a different tzedakah, it has to be a bigger tzedakah, a mitzvah. Now, that's very, very hard or impossible to rate mitzvahs, by us, kal k'chamura. But the poskim do discuss this type of question. I'll quote the Lashon Chasam Sofer Yeridei Simon Reish Mem Dalid, where someone pledged money for a mikveh, and they wanted to use they had money for learning, and they wanted to use it for a mikveh. The Chasam Sofer expresses his amazement. How could you make such a mistake? How could you take money earmarked for Torah and use it for a mikveh? Lo yachlifu ber mayim chayim bebar mikveh mayim. Torah is the samachayim. How do you change that for a mikveh? Now, of course, the Chasam Sofer was not talking about a city that had no mikveh and had no kedushas Yisrael Rachmana litzlan. That's an emergency. It's probably like today. Every shul has to have their Olympic-sized mikveh. That's an attraction. And this shul wanted it, so they wanted to make a nice mikveh, an additional mikveh. That you can't do. But lamaisa, in theory, from Torah to mikveh is an hayrada. Again, if the mikveh is needed desperately, that has top priority. That's kedushas Yisrael. So our case, l'chayra, we wanted to do fakert, change from mikveh to beis medrash. At least we're convinced that's malam b'kodesh. But I told this person, lamaisa, you're talking about a suffix if you makayim your neder. Like the pashta of Chaber Amah and many Rishonim, ein mishanim tzedakah l'tzedakah. So the eighth would be matan neder. You made a mistake. You never really wanted this. Whatever it is, if a rav is matan neder, it's fine. Now it becomes sticky if, let's say, he wants to change it. Not like in our case, the same kehillah is building. They need money for the mikveh fund and for the beis medrash. He wants to give it to a different beis medrash. So that, I saw the tzedakah mishpat, he says that's also, besides changing the mitzvah, it's also changing the bailus. A different mossad is a different mossad. It's almost like ani la'ani. So that you have to be really careful before you change your mind. I saw a Sri Lanka fish in Evan Yisrael, Chelik Tessim and Tzedakah, it was almost amusing, but someone pledged to help a yeshiva build their oitza svarim. Going to give all the svarim they need. He got into a fight with one of the menalim, whatever, and he decides to change to a different tzedakah. Build a different oitza svarim. He doesn't like this yeshiva. So he goes with the sugya, Beinu Baruch, it's a machlokes, it's the same mitzvah, but l'maisa you're changing. So he says, if you want to, best of the be matan neder. But at the end he adds, but by the way, I have a tzarchin. What about the issa of nekim and atira? You're changing. You're worrying about tzedakah. What about the benad mechaveira? But I'm benad mamaka, maybe it is. He says, tzarchin about that. So be careful. Might be mutter, but nekama and atira is still an issa deraisa. Someone gave a sefer Torah to a shul, and he realized it's rarely used. When they have 3 sefer Torah, maybe, and he's very unhappy. He wants his sefer Torah to be used. Can he change it to a different kehillah? So this sounds intimidating. A different kehillah is like ani la'ani. But it's not a shayla for 3 good reasons. First of all, whoever does donate a sefer Torah to a shul, it's not donating it. It's on loan. If you give the sefer Torah to a shul, you lost the mitzvah. It's clearly stipulated. In fact, some people write it on the mantle. But no doubt about it, you only gave it, you loaned it to the shul. You're allowed to change your decision to loan it to different shul. Also, the fact that they used it already, so you makayim your loan. Didn't say you have to use for 100 years. And also, the fact that it's not being used is really a violation of your agreement. Rabbi Yashav, in a different context, and we'll soon see Chelik Aleph, Semet Tzadik Ches, Otla Ukma Bekilsa, did you donate it so it should be put into a garage just to be kept? So that's why it's pashut, you're allowed to take a sefer Torah to a different shul. The Tila LeDavid is a thin volume on Yeridei, Reish Nun Tes. He says if you gave svarim to a yeshiva or to a shul, it's not being used. No one learns it. You're allowed to take it out and give it to a different place that will use it more. Now, he doesn't talk about the fact that it's a different mossad. I don't know why, but definitely it's malam b'kodesh from not being used to being used. Rav Moshe was asked an historical question. In Yeridei Aleph Kuf Memches, guarded by Rabbi Yeshua Zechaynu Levracha, they raised money during the beginning of the Second World War to send clothing to Aniyim in Poland. The war broke out and they couldn't ship the clothing. So here, the good Israel had a lot of clothing. What do you do with it? So Moshe went through the sugya. It's a beautiful tshuva to hold on to it. It's going to go, might go down in value, it might get old. He says, give it to other aniyim that need the money and need the clothing, but make sure when there will be, again, an ability to send to the platim to the aniyim in Poland, you have to give back that money. But at this point, he relied that mishana tzedakah because the clothing would go down in value. Someone pledged to a yeshiva to change to a different yeshiva. Again, the tzedakah mishpat amar reishia test says, besides the fact that it's taka the same type of mitzvah, but you're talking about a different bailas, and that's more complicating. Someone pledged to a one base medrash. Can he change to a different base medrash? Again, it's the same kedusha, but the problem is the bailas is different. How about if he wanted to build a base haknesses, and then he decides to build a base hamedrash? Now we think they're the same, but a base haknesses today is pretty rare. It's only where davening goes on. There's no eating, there's no learning, there's no mezuzah. It's exclusively the base Hashem for tefillah. So even though tefillah is heilig, but the Mechab in the beginning, in Arachayim, beginning of Kuf Nun Gimel says, Beis HaMedrash is a higher level. So you're allowed to change from Beis HaKnesses to Beis HaMedrash, but not vice versa. Obviously, you have to be careful. If it's a different bailas, you got a problem. Now, a tough question is, let's say you've originally pledged to build a cheder, yeshiva ktana. Younger boys, you want to change and donate to a Beis Medrash, to a kollel. So the emes is, it's not poshet. The Marshdam in the Tshuva says that learning of younger children, that's Tinaika Beis Rabban. It's the purity with the Loi Tamu Tamchet. And don't forget, when the Mashiach comes, we'll hopefully run to be able to be Zoycha to build the Beis HaMikdash. The Tashbar have to stay learning. So he convinced that changing from a younger grades to a Masifta Beis Medrash is Maridin B'Kedusha. Rav Moshe in Yeridei Chelik Gimel Siman Tzadik Dalid is not as convinced. He says if the older kollel or even Beis Medrash are producing Gedolei Yisrael that are desperately needed, that takes priority. But there's no doubt about it, we shouldn't ever underestimate the value of giving even to a yeshiva ktana, because that's really the purest Torah that we have. But again, if it's a different mossad, then you have the problem. Besides of the fact that it might be the same learning, it's a different bailas, and that taka is a problem. The Tzitz Eliezer Chelik Tessim and Yozayin Pei Zayin was asked the question, someone earmarked money for Torah learning, for yeshiva, and now there was a crucial, critical pikuach nefesh need. So he says, pikuach nefesh daicha everything, and definitely daicha this as well. In Kovetz Tshuvas, with Riyash Sefer Chelik Aleph Siman Tzadik Ches, goes back to Tafshin Chav Beis. But Rab Chaim, his Eidim asked him, in their shul, I guess it was Letterman shul, they had no klaf, navi klaf, for the Haftarahs. And Lamaisa, they couldn't raise the money. This is a Bnei Brak then that was pretty poor. Someone else pledged to give to his shul klaf for the Haftarahs. And Lamaisa didn't work out. He kept commissioning Gesaifa, didn't work out. Plus, he said he lost his chesed because the shul was a chassidish shul. They weren't going to use the klaf. So someone said, you know what, your money's sitting, do nothing, pledge for Taras HaMishpacha. Then he found out that Letterman Shul, and the stipend davened there, Chaim was young then, but he also davened there, they need klaf. So he wanted to give the money to Letterman Shul. Mitzad Echad, it was the same klaf, but then again, he pledged for Taras HaMishpacha. So Reb Chaim writes that my father, the stipend, doesn't want to paskin, please paskin. So Rabbi Yasha in a beautiful tshuva, mamash, you see the Yisoidis, what he basically says is that, first of all, could be the Taras HaMishpacha wasn't so pashut, changing from one tzedakah to another one. Maybe it's a shtickle of toyis, but here it's basically a wonderful way of fulfilling your commitment. You wanted to give, he says also, you didn't say the Lashon neder to give to the shul. He wanted to devote it to having klaf. So maybe it's not even a shinui from mossad to mossad, because the wording was a pretty powerful lashon. He wanted there should be klaf that's used. So Ma'aser Rabbi Yashav is mekel, but again, more than the psak, it's the way he goes with the sugya, and he touches every detail. the Sholem till he saw the test. Someone donated, bought a clock for the shul, but they didn't need it, they didn't want it. Return to sender. He says that Adar, you're absolved of your commitment. He doesn't say the word neder toyis, but that's what it is. They don't want it. So give it to a different mois that will appreciate it. The Imre Yosh and Chelik Beis Kuf Mem Ches, where they collected money thinking they needed $1,000 and they only need 500, and the person gave 1,000. He said that's another toys. He could take back the $500. He gave it for this particular need, and it wasn't necessary. Rav Feivel Cohen Zechron Levracha asked this to Rabbi Yashiv. It's printed in Rabbi Yashiv's Tshuva Sefer Aleph Tzadik Ches, Aleph Simon Kuf, I should say, where a person wrote a tzava, and he gave a certain amount of money to different tzedakahs. Now years go by, he's still healthy, Baruch Hashem. He wants to change his tzava pledge. It's got a very common shayla. Now he has new commitments. He has einiklach and yeshivas or whatever. He wants to change mamish, but he wrote down a real lashon of neder. So Bayasha says in there, Yisrael is not a shayla, because in the tzava it's written that he could change b'chayav. It's a precondition. So he says mistavra, even in chutz la'aretz, even if it's not written, that's the minig. So it's sort of al das kain, and he's allowed to change. If someone pledged money and is not sure to which mossad he pledged, he knows it was $1,000, but he doesn't know to which mossad. So here, the eighth is mataneda, and then start again. But I was thinking there's another relief in this shaila, because even if you end up giving to a different mossad, in the worst scenario, what is it? Mishanen, from tzedakah to tzedakah. Okay, you have a Beinu Baruch to be saimechan if it's the same bailus. A pledge where the tzedakah or the mossad closed. Sometimes you have a Pushka or even a yeshiva. Sometimes, after a while it closes and you didn't know. So it's pashit that lamaisa you can't give it to that mossad. So you have to give it to a comparable mossad that's doing the same type of work. The Beis Lechem Yehuda in Reish and Gimel Vav quotes a Marshdam. If someone wrote a tzava to give to a mossad and it closed down, so if it closed b'chayav, so he has no chiv whatsoever to that mossad. There's no chiv. Then you give it to any mossad. Acha moisai, so we're back to this shayla, and give it to the closest mossad available. Ma'isa shahaya, and unfortunately it's a true story. Someone told me he has to raise a lot of money. So he made up the most tragic story available, but he said, but I'm a legitimate ani. Now this is a pachat, because, Geneva's das, sheker, chas v'sholem. We're talking about Mashana, how we sit there for changing money, but to make up a story that's not true, if your story is, say the right story, hopefully you'll get money. But, it doesn't justify doing any type of an aveira. I heard this from an Eid Neman. They once printed a tzedakah letter for Beis Medrash Gavoya, and they had a picture of the yeshiva then, and they added a tree or two that wasn't there to make it look nicer. And Baron looks at it and says, "Where's this tree?" He goes, "Yeah, just now." He goes, and he insisted that we can't use it. Yeah. Now, a tree is not sheker in the Beis Medrash Gavoya, but definitely, sheker, Geneva's das, Geneva, whatever you want to call it. I saw too many tshuvas to mention to you, but no doubt about it, it has to be with the greatest integrity. Someone asked the Shaila, could he collect money for a Talmid Chacham? But it's not going to work, so he calls out Chanas's Kala, and a Kala is Talmid Chacham, the Zohar says. So all these things are, doesn't work. You have to be honest. Now, I'd like to leave that with my version of the Fear Kashas 4 Shailas. We always try before Yom Tiv to give something to talk about. So this is definitely good Zevach Mishpacha for the Purim Suda. A person put money in the Pushka, didn't say a word, and wants to change his mind. The question is, can he do it? So you're wondering, l'chayra, if I take out the money and give it to a better tzedakah, maybe I'm fine. But wait a second, the question is, what is the status of a Pushka? If we hold a Pushka is like the Yad tzedakah, it's like Yad Gabay. You can't even borrow the money. You can't even change the money anymore. So forget about, taking it out. You can't even take 4 quarters for $1. Now, maybe you'll say, but wait a minute, it's in my house. How does it become the tzedakah money? But we find the concept of Kelev Shalokeyach, B'Rishus Moicha, B'Rishus Makne, becomes the one that owns the chutzah. Maybe the pushka is a mini kollel shel tzedakah. Maybe chutzah mishtameres, don't forget, I allow it and I safeguard it. So the fact that it's me in my house doesn't really affect this shaila. So the emphasis is, a lot was written about this shaila in a beautiful part of our history. Excuse me 1 second. And that is Ramei Balanes. The Heilige Tzedakah goes back probably over 200 years ago at least. But basically, it's not the way we understand it today as a tzedakah. People in Poland, in Poland, wanted to have a shaykh to Eretz Yisrael, but they couldn't afford to move to Eretz Yisrael. So they collected money faithfully, sent it to their landslide that moved to Eretz Yisrael. So by supporting Eretz Yisrael and the Eretz Yisrael, they felt the connection to Eretz Yisrael. But as you can understand, living in Poland or any part of Europe for that matter, there was terrible needs for ani yercha. People had this pushka with lots of money to go to Eretz Yisrael. Now there's pressing ani yercha. So the question we're asked, can we take the money from my baby on S pushka and give it ani yercha koidim? So there's a Chuvas Ma'amar Mordechai Simon Tezvav, his son Maria Levi, the Vechayim, Chasam Soifa, Beis Yitzchak. Anybody who lives in that kufa writes that a pushka becomes the bailis of the tzedakah of the ani. It becomes a me'ebal nesses. I mean, he's not that person, but that tzedakah was kainit. In fact, the derech of Reb Chaim and derech Hamunah Ches Kuf Chavav won this. Maybe you can't even take change from the pushka, because even l'shnoisa is only at shebal yad gabay, and this bal yad gabay. So lemaisa at the end he says if it's done, maybe it's like a kilu hisna. Rabbi Yankel Bloy in Tzedakah Mishpat Reishut Ches, he says if you're not really being mafsid tzedakah, you're taking 4 quarters, putting in $1. Maybe they're happy. They don't want your quarters and pennies and nickels. So lemaisa, we could say like Reb Chaim says an unspoken tanai, but let's be real. Let's be realistic. The pushka has the status of the tzedakah. So definitely to take it out and say I didn't, say anything is wrong. You more than said you gave it to the tzedakah. Question: you got a tzedakah letter, and you got an envelope, and you put in a money, cash. We'll talk about cash. It makes it easier. Is an envelope considered bal yad gabay? So the obvious chiluk between pushka and an envelope needs no explanation. A pushka is a chotza, is a mini box. An envelope is just maybe a covering. So Re'ez Pella, Reb Chaim Briska in stencil in Gittin Chaf Aleph says a ma'aseh shehaya brisk, a person gave a get in an envelope and put it down, and the isha took the envelope off the table. Is that a megureshes? So Reb Chaim declared maybe it's like the Gemara, taking that sugya. If you put down a get and the isha takes it, that is not a get because it has to be v'nasan biyada. But if you put it in a chotza and you makna the chotza to her, that's the nesina. Maybe the same is the get in the envelope, but he says that it's a big chilik because the giving of the get is through the makna of the chotza, but here the envelope is just a covering over the of the get. Or you makna the envelope that it becomes like a chotza. But he says maybe taka will call the envelope like the chetzera of the isha. So by putting it down, it would be like an akno through chotza. But Chaim Paskin, it's a safek gerushin. Pretty disappointing, not very decisive. So our case of putting in an envelope might be the same like a Chaim's get case. Get is a Mohammedic sugya. Maybe the envelope is the chotza of the tzedakah. But I saw in a wonderful sefer, Shari Tzedek, on B'tov Kuf Lamed Daled, he quotes Takidus of Chaim, and he says, Rabbi Yashiv said that an envelope doesn't seem to be a chotza. It's more of it's tuffle to what's holding. It's not like a pushka. Also, and this is very likely, the Metzias is, I don't think the tzedakah keeps the bilas of the envelope. Maybe the pushka they want to be theirs, but the envelope is like the letter. And he quotes. He said, Goyin Echad said, I don't think even the envelope is the bilas of the tzedakah. So there's no chutzar in an envelope. But Rabbi say, make sure one thing you realize: that putting money in an envelope is minimally the machshav of a tzedakah. You made a very firm decision, the fact you put money in the envelope. So even though it's not boli yad gabai, but minimally it would be like a machshav of a tzedakah, and you'd have to give it to that mossad. Now, the only question is a boli yad gabai. Oh, so here I have a chap here also. Because we said earlier, when there's a neder b'machshava, it's only chal on the chi of neder. But changing mi'ani la'ani, we saw is okay. So maybe the fact, if you didn't verbalize a commitment, just put money in the envelope, which was a machshava, so taka it's chal, but you could change mi'ani la'ani. So for that reason, you had to change. Question number 3. A person wrote out a check for tzedakah. Now, he didn't put it in a Pushka envelope, but he was so distraught because he decided to change his mind, he tore it up quickly. Then he asked Shilas. So he has a torn check written to mossad Pliny. He wants to change. The question is, did he do a good thing? Now, if he originally pledged is one thing. He didn't pledge. He just wrote out a check and decided he wants to change. So the question is there taka a pledge for tzedakah? So this is part of a big sugya of neder b'ksav. If I write a legitimate, full-fledged neder b'ksav, is it a chalais din neder? And that's a machlokes gedolei haposkim. But the point is that regarding a check, there's probably less of a shaila, because you didn't write lashon neder. You wrote the mossad, amount, your name, and the date maybe. Where's the neder? The tzedakah mishpat perek daled aram mem says even more than that than I'm saying. I think what I said is pashut. He says even if you write pay to the order of mossad Pliny, is that a neder, or you're basically giving instructions? Pay to the order. So I will, I won't. You didn't obligate yourself, so it seems that a check would not be a neder b'ksav, but something that Betzina Rav and Chelik Bey Simon Ches of Ber Moshe. But minimally, it's a machshava, because if you wrote out a check, obviously you had a machshava. It wasn't a fleeting moment. So it comes out, writing a check and you change your mind would be, if you're an Ashkenazi, you can't change your mind. If you're a Sephardi and you're makel on machshava, maybe you could. But one thing I would add, like I said earlier, if it's only al neder b'machshava, maybe you have the heter to change mi'ani la'ani. And last but not least, it's supposed to be a true story. I hope not, but it's supposed to be a true story. Someone, they made a peel and it was going very slowly. So someone who was not a big Baal Mammon, but he wanted to, get the other excited, and he called out the $5,000 pledge, and all the oohs and woos, wasn't spoiled, and they started giving, because if this, this ani could give, we have to give. After Shabbos, the Gabbai said, okay, where's the $5,000? Because I never meant giving it. I want to get the oilam excited. I had a mind, I'm just giving it just to get everybody excited. Question, does he have to give the money? So, this grada made it to Beferish Gemara. In Sukkah Chav Tes, Gemara says, a horrifying prediction. For 4 things, a person loses, his money goes to the Malchus. One of them is Paiskim Tzedakah Barabim Ve'einam Noisnim. He pledges and doesn't fulfill his pledge. Now, apparently the Marsha was bothered which year doesn't keep his pledge. So Marsha doesn't ask that question, but he says what it means is that one of the Balabatim that want to encourage others to give, makes an exorbitant pledge, and even that, if he doesn't give it, he'll lose his money. So that's our shaila. It's a Gemara with the Marsha. Even though you mean well, but you didn't keep your pledge. Now, you can't get better than a Gemara, Marsha, and Minchas Yitzchak. However, someone tied it to me, but it wasn't pivoli b'shavin. He wasn't intending on giving from the first moment he started. But that's not agala and sugya. That's dvarm shebalev. You said very clearly that you were going to give this money. Now, if you said 1,000 instead of 100 by mistake, no, we could talk. But this is a real neder that you made clearly that has very much sense. Rav Sternbuch Chelik Dalas and Mereish Tezayin, he taka says, if you go over to the Gabbai before and say, I'm just doing it, I'm telling you right now, I don't mean it. So that could be, that withholds the neder. But even that, what about sheker? What about Genevas Das? It's an Issa Gomer. He calls it Ainah. Ayvarach David and Kuf Yud Aleph is also a little more makel, but he says at the end of the day, it's Genevas Das. The Dvar Yeshua has a beautiful tshuva in Chele Gimel Lamed Zayin, like I told you earlier, collecting for Talmid Chacham, you call it Chonas Kala. He says you don't collect money with sheker. I just wanted to end with this, that tzedakah is a heilige mitzvah, but it has to be with the selbe ehrlichkeit, with the same yashrus. A guten Tag und a freilichen Purim to you all.
Shame, ik should tell like the biggest church of Smith today's year. Also, the shul has a collection for Matanas Tavyonim. Checks were made out to congregation Beis Aaron, Matanas Tavyonim by Biyoim. The Smith will say a secret of today's year. Freilich and Purim to everyone. Kananya ben Akashim. Tzedakah. Zelf figure. Teil of Yagel Tervi Yade.
Alles? Mais, mas é? Vai. Amém. 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 Ei, vamos tocar. Lá no meio, maior.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, so remember, but whatever you collect the money for, or you're setting aside money for, make it tonight, that it could also be for Eigen Shirei Torah. So leave it at Tzedakah. Okay, seek him of today's share on the Nidjei Tzedakah.
Just what we learned today, a pledge, and certainly on there is very chomer. Yanim's fruit is very chomer. So the sugya is a very chomer, the kasugya. But according to many poskim, a pledge is not just to give X amount of dollars for tzedakah, it's to give, and the pledge is chal on this neder or this mitzvah, and that is the basis of ein mishanin mi tzedakah l'tzedakah mi ani la'ani. The Gemara that says that l'shanais means taking change. You're allowed to take change or even borrow small money as long as you make sure to pay back. But to change direction of a mitzvah, according to many Rishonim, is awesome. Some are mekel, Rabbeinu Baruch is mekel, and some paskin Rabbeinu Baruch. But as we said, we have to treat it like a sveiki derais l'chumra, because changing the direction of the tzedakah is like changing the pledge. You're not doing the pledge. So we came out that even though there are makilim on both, shini mitzvah or shini ani la'ani, but it's kedari b'mata neder, and then as if the pledge never was made. If it's a neder b'toyis, a valid neder b'toyis, then you don't have to be mata neder. We wonder if changing is mechusa emana. Klamais, you didn't keep your word, so presumably we will say that if you have a heter to change, maybe it's al das kain. Rabbi Yitzchak Petersburg is concerned about the mechusa emana. A person put the wrong money in the wrong pushka, or put the wrong amount of money in the right pushka, that would be legitimate, a case of neder b'toyis. The ani disappeared, so give it to a similar ani. The best thing is make it tonight with a lifetime warranty, guarantee. It's only chal when the ani actually gets it. If a person has a machshava to give tzedakah, so Bnei Ashkenaz, if it's a firm commitment, is like a machshava to give tzedakah, and you have to give it. But the mechaba is not, the minig of Sfaradim is not clear. But definitely for the Bnei Ashkenaz, you have to give the commitment. But in that case, you're allowed to change. If a shidduch was broken, give it for the next shidduch. If the kala died, then the money should be given to a different needy kala. You collected for Talmid Chacham for a sick child. Let him keep. If you want to keep the money of Adar, that's good enough. Leftover money goes to the ani, but not that lachatchil. You can't collect extra money. Even those that are mekel to change mitzvah is only if it's a malam b'kodesh. Torah to mikveh is invalid, vice versa is valid. So if Torah is not used, you could change it to a different shul for obvious reasons. Svarim that are not used, you could change it. Hopefully you're not violating the bailus of it. But definitely a mossad to a different mossad is like a different onion, and there's more care regarding the child. Yeshiva or tashbar, not poshit, you got to know the sugya. Surely, if it's producing Gedolei Yisrael, the Moiri Hara, Moshe holds, that definitely supersedes the aniyim, the tashbar. A pledge that was refused by the mossad, so you could say it's not a batois, but to give it to someone somewhere else. It's hava is an unspoken condition. You're allowed to change it, but of course, b'chaya. A mossad that closed, give it to a comparable mossad. Shekin, Geneva's das, or Geneva is certainly unacceptable ever, definitely by this heilige mitzvah of tzedakah. And the four questions we discussed, the Pushka is boli yad gabai, but you're allowed to change it because if it's only b'machshava. Taking change from the Pushka is an unspoken Tanai is mutter. A tzedakah envelope is not considered boli yad gabai, but it is a firm mental decision, so that would be machshava. Wrote out a check. The question is it a neder b'ksav? Probably not, but it's definitely a machshava. And to pledge just to give, make others give is wrong. You want to give the money, give yourself, or plead with them, but you're not allowed to use any less than perfect means.